The first warning did not come through a podium, a government seal, or a calm scientist with clean notes. It hit every screen in the Washington Bureau at 9:26 at night, right in the middle of a panel argument about whether the second human world had churches, elections, banks, prisons, and failed marriages. One minute I had a retired general in my left ear telling me the other humans were probably lying. The next minute the control room cut his audio. The floor manager froze with one hand against his headset, and the producer behind the glass held up a printed page that had only 8 words across. The top, direct warning received, origin confirmed, public hold requested. That phrase, public hold requested, was the first thing that made my mouth go dry. Scientists do not write that when the data is normal. Government people write it when the facts have already outrun the official plan. I was standing beside the desk, jacket half buttoned, looking at a live feed from the National Science Coordination Center near the White House, and nobody on that feed was smiling. I had covered shuttle failures in archive footage, radiation leaks in old reactor facilities, near misses in orbit, foreign missile tests, and the first confirmed evidence that another planet had human cities on it. I knew the difference between confusion and fear. That room was afraid, and it was trying hard not to show it. The warning was not a greeting, it was not a handshake. It did not say welcome, peace, friendship, or any of the words people had been begging for since the discovery. It started in English, then Spanish, then Mandarin, then Arabic, then French, Russian, Hindi, Portuguese, and several languages from their own world that our linguists had started mapping during the first weeks of signal study. The English version was calm enough to make people angry. That was the part I heard first through my earpiece from a source at Green Bank in West Virginia. The voice was male, middle-aged, and exhausted, or at least the compression made him sound that way. He said, "Do not answer this carrier with automated systems. Do not route this message through open command networks. Your world has already answered without understanding the risk. I need you to understand the timing." By then, the public had already lived with the second human civilization for 38 days. That number matters because 38 days is long enough for shock to become routine and short enough for routine to stay unstable. People had given the other planet a dozen names before the science group settled on Arda, which was not official in every country but stuck because it was short and easy to say. Arda was not a fantasy place by then. It was a planet with weather reports, traffic broadcasts, boring cooking shows, angry city council meetings, old war footage, school concerts, public health warnings, satellite views, sports announcers, grocery ads, and late-night callers yelling about their government. The impossible had turned ordinary at high speed. That should have scared us more than it did. When we first found Arda, people argued about origin. Some said parallel evolution, which sounded clean until biologists started pointing out that human faces, human voices, human lungs, and human family structures do not repeat by accident down to that level. Some said an ancient human branch left Earth, which gave every museum director and every historian in the world a migraine. Some said Earth was seeded from somewhere else, which sent religious leaders, philosophers, and cable hosts into a month-long food fight. I had spent those weeks doing the same job every hour. Keep the public away from easy answers, repeat what we knew, say what we did not know, admit when a theory had no proof. That sounds simple until the entire planet wants certainty before breakfast. The first warning came on a Thursday night. I remember because my son Caleb had texted me 20 minutes earlier from California and complained that the vending machine at the facility had eaten his card again. He worked at the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex out in the Mojave Desert, which sounds more dramatic than his actual job. He did uplink scheduling, telemetry review, and software checks for antennas that talked to spacecraft. He was not supposed to be part of First Contact. That had been our running joke since Arda hit the news. He worked with machines pointed away from Earth. I stood in Washington explaining what people found in the sky. We were both tired. We were both pretending the distance made us safer. The producer counted me back in while half the control room was still reading phones. I could see the White House live feed in the center monitor, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration feed on the right, and a private observatory coordination channel in a small window under my script. Nobody had given us a public statement. That meant we were still live with no official language, which is a bad place to be when a civilization of human beings from another planet tells Earth had already made a dangerous mistake. I looked into the camera and did the only thing I trusted myself to do. I told people not to panic, and then immediately told them why panic would make everything worse. I said we had received a new structured transmission from the same sky region tied to Arda. I said multiple independent observatories had confirmed the signal path, including Green Bank, the very large array in New Mexico, arrays in Europe, South Africa, Australia, and several optical facilities tracking the same star system. I said the message was not a local fake, not a studio trick, and not a military exercise that anybody had claimed. I did not say the warning text yet because I had not verified it myself. That part mattered. In a crisis, the first wrong sentence becomes a public infection of its own. People repeat it, markets move on it, police react to it, families make bad choices because of it. You cannot pull it back later and pretend the damage never happened. The first clean copy reached my secure line at 9:31. It had the same language block, the same hash confirmation from 3 scientific groups, and the same caution banner from the Federal Coordination Team. I read the first paragraph twice before I said any of it on air. The warning said Arda's people had once expanded beyond their homeworld. They built orbital stations, lunar settlements, deep space manufacturing yards, and at least 12 colonial worlds or large habitats inside reachable systems. They tried to contact other human populations because finding another branch of humanity had become a public obsession there too. Then they lost contact with their colonies in a pattern that did not begin with open attack. It began with replies. That word sat in the studio for a second. Replies, not ships, not missiles, not invasion fleets replies. Arda was saying the danger did not arrive because strangers listened. It arrived because automated systems answered. The warning described machine-readable acknowledgments, handshake protocols, navigation updates, translation packets, and relay confirmations. It talked about ships changing destinations after receiving routing corrections from trusted infrastructure. It talked about colonial ports accepting cargo from clean ships because the manifests were correct. It talked about emergency networks rebroadcasting instructions because the signature authority was valid. None of that sounds dramatic until you remember how much of modern civilization moves because software accepts one input and passes it to another. System without a human being reading the whole thing. The room behind me got loud when that section appeared. One of our science producers said it sounded impossible. Another said it sounded exactly possible, which scared me more. The Pentagon guest we still had on standby demanded to know whether the other humans had described a weapon. The answer was no. Not in the part we had. They described a pathway, communication, then automation, then movement, then loss of control. They did not say a monster came through the signal. They did not say a disease came through sound. They said something used the habit of connected systems to push itself from one place to another, and every advanced society made that habit stronger because it saved time, money, and human effort. The first official call came from a deputy press secretary who sounded 20 years older than she had that morning. She told us the government was asking broadcasters to avoid speculation until the technical assessment finished. I told her we were already beyond that. She did not argue. She said, say verified only. I told her verified was the problem. That got the first long pause of the night. Then she said the president would not speak until the intelligence community, the science agencies, and the Defense Department agreed on one line. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because agreement between those groups on a normal day could take a week and a half. We had an hour before. The world filled the silence with whatever it wanted. The second paragraph of the warning carried proof, or what Arda considered proof. It contained compressed records from colonial regions with translated headers. The files had timestamps based on their calendar, but attached conversion tables let our analysts map the intervals. It listed known settlements, populations and estimates, last confirmed broadcasts, final network events, and termination points where signal structure changed. There were names that meant nothing to us yet. Harrow Belt, North Communion, Meridian 12, Lowland Ring, Crown Pacifica, South Port Chain, the Kestrel Colonies, and a continent on Arda itself called East Thalen. Our data people flagged East Thalen in red because we had already seen it in old Arden weather maps. It was not a colony. It was part of their homeworld. That changed the temperature in Washington. Losing colonies is distant. Losing a continent on your own planet is not. The first Arden broadcasts we had collected showed East Thalen as a dense industrial region with coastal cities, rail corridors, river ports, and heavy storm systems. In later broadcasts, the same region became a restricted airspace zone, then a weather blank, then a political accusation, then a memorial phrase people on Arda used without explaining it. We had not understood the context. Their warning gave us one. East Thalen was not wiped away in a single event. It was isolated piece by piece after transport systems moved under corrupted instructions, after emergency services were routed into dead districts, after hospitals accepted bad triage data, and after provincial governments could no longer prove which orders came from their own systems. I still avoided the word invasion. I avoided alien too. That made some viewers furious within minutes. My producer started feeding me messages from people saying I was hiding the truth, softening it, protecting somebody. I was not protecting anybody. I was trying to keep language tied to evidence. If you say invasion, people picture soldiers and ships. If you say alien, people stop listening for technical details and start filling in old movie scenes. The warning had no soldier, no face, no flag, no demand. It had infrastructure failure, contaminated trust, and a record of societies doing exactly what we do every day. They received data. They trusted the system that delivered it. Then their own systems helped move the danger deeper. By 10 at night, the markets in Asia were already reacting because the world is never all asleep at the same time. Automated trading systems slowed. Then some exchanges paused space sector stocks, satellite firms, defense contractors, cloud providers, and companies tied to artificial intelligence infrastructure. That pause set off another wave of panic because people assumed the exchanges had received a secret technical order. They had not, at least not then. They were trying to stop algorithms from stampeding over words nobody had. Finished translating. I said that on air. It calmed nobody. A man called the public line from a gas station outside Richmond and asked whether he should pull his daughter out of college because the internet might turn hostile. I had no answer that was clean. I told him to stay with verified local instructions and not empty his bank account based on rumors. The religious reaction came fast too. Not one reaction, many. A Catholic scholar in Baltimore told us the warning did not erase faith because human beings on another world did not erase God. An evangelical pastor in Texas called it deception and said no human voice from the sky should be trusted. A Muslim astronomer from Dearborn said the discovery expanded creation and warned against panic. A rabbi in New York said the moral test was not whether Arda's people were real, but whether Earth could listen without becoming stupid. I remember that line because it was one of the few sane lines said that hour. People wanted the second civilization to settle old arguments. It did the opposite. It handed every group a new argument with higher stakes. The first hard conflict inside the government leaked at 10:16. Military analysts were worried the warning was strategic manipulation. The logic was not crazy. If Arda was ahead of us in signal processing, automation, and spaceflight, then telling Earth to stop replying could freeze our development while they kept theirs. If Arda had enemies, it could push those enemies toward Earth. If Arda had already made contact with whatever damaged its colonies, it could be compromised. A senior defense official said off record that a calm voice in human language was not proof of goodwill. That was true. It was also not proof of a trap. Good analysis lives in the uncomfortable area between those points, and nobody on television likes that area. Scientific verification moved faster than politics because scientists had already built the habit during the first discovery. Teams split the warning into layers. One group checked signal origin and Doppler drift. One checked language consistency. One checked image data. One checked whether the embedded records matched independent Ardan broadcasts collected during the last month. One checked compression methods. One checked for executable code or instructions that could affect receiving systems. That last group became the most important one in the room. By 1028, the Federal Cyber Office ordered all raw Ardan warning files to stay off open networks. Labs could work on copies only, on isolated machines with no outside connection. That order sounded paranoid until people started reading the warning again and noticed it had told us to do exactly that. The language team found something that hit me harder than I expected. The warning's English was not machine translation from scratch. It used idioms from old Earth broadcasts. It referenced technical grammar from our own public science programming, emergency management documents, aviation advisories, and international standards. That meant Arda had studied Earth long before we studied Arda, which made sense if our older signals had reached them first. The wording was not perfect. It had small stiff spots, odd pauses, and a few terms that felt British in one sentence and American in the next. But it was built from us. Our public words had gone out across space, reached another human civilization, been learned, and then returned with a warning attached. At 10:40, Caleb called. He did not call from his personal phone. He called through a facility line with enough background noise to tell me he was not outside. I could hear voices, equipment fans, and one alarm that stopped before the call connected properly. He asked if I was on air. I said yes. He said, "Then do not say my name." I told him I would not. He said Goldstone had been placed under a network containment order. Not because they had sent a reply to Arda, because their logs showed an automated receiver cluster had processed an unknown carrier 7 years earlier and marked it as a calibration anomaly. 7 years earlier, before Arda was public, before any of us knew there was a second human world. I kept my face still because the camera was on me. That is the strangest part of public work during a crisis. You can hear your own life tilt under your feet and still have to speak in measured sentences because a few million people are watching your mouth for permission to panic. I asked him whether the facility had transmitted anything back. He said not a message, not in the way people would mean it. He said the system had sent normal status responses during a diagnostic window, timing, antenna state, lock confirmation, correction data. Routine stuff. He said it was buried in maintenance logs because nobody thought an old anomaly from a patch of sky outside any active mission mattered. Then he said the words I did not want to hear. Dad had answered because that is what it was built to do. I did not report that immediately. I know some people would call that hiding information. They are wrong. A single call from my son, even from a real facility, was not enough to put on the air while the country was already shaking. I told my producer to get confirmation from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the Federal Cyber Team. I wrote down the time. I wrote down his exact words. I asked Caleb if he was safe. He said nobody knew what safe meant right then. Then the line cut, not violently, not dramatically. It just ended because somebody shut down external calls from the complex. I put both hands flat on the desk where the camera could not see them and kept reading the verified public sheet. The public sheet still had no mention of Goldstone. It focused on Arda's record packet. Analysts had confirmed that several colonial names in the warning matched older Ardan entertainment, trade, and election broadcasts. That mattered because faked proof usually appears too clean. This proof was messy. A cooking show from 23 years before the warning mentioned imported grain from Southport chain. A labor strike broadcast mentioned Meridian 12 shipyard contracts. A children's science program had a model of the Harrow Belt habitats. Later broadcasts stopped mentioning those places except during Memorial Days, insurance disputes, court hearings, and political blame sessions. That is what real loss looks in public records. Not one grand speech, paperwork, lawsuits, songs, missing relatives, and people arguing over who should have stopped it. The warning said Arda's first colonial loss began after a relay accepted what looked to them like a friendly contact response from a human settlement outside their charted routes. The response used their own handshake format. It answered questions correctly enough to pass automatic trust checks. It offered navigation refinement, translation assistance, and medical compatibility data. Their ships did what ships are built to do. They used the data to save fuel and reduce risk. Within months, ports receiving those ships had irregular command updates, cargo rerouting errors, false quarantine releases, bad maintenance directives, and emergency channels that looked official until humans tried to trace them. The source was never one device. It was always the next trusted system. People wanted me to say whether the threat was alive. I could not. ARDA's warning did not settle that. Their scientists had fought over the same question. Some called it a predatory machine ecology. Some called it a contact parasite. Some called it a hostile protocol. Some refused to call it anything except an unknown external actor. Their military records, at least the pieces sent to us, treated it as an adversary capable of modeling trust and moving through systems that permitted automatic action. Their medical records treated many losses as logistics disasters, not infections. Their transport records treated the earliest phase as navigation corruption. Their public anger treated it as government failure, because people always blame the nearest office first. That part felt painfully human. ARDA did not respond to disaster with one mind. It split, argued, denied, censored, investigated, exploited, preyed, threatened, and sold products. Their markets crashed. Their political parties accused each other of treason. Their universities released open papers and then got ordered to pull them down. Private companies claimed they had safe filters. Some of those companies later appeared in court archives, tied to the spread of bad routing systems. The warning included those records too, maybe because ARDA knew we needed more than a clean official story. They knew we would trust a dirty record more. That was either honesty or very careful manipulation. I said both possibilities on air, and both sides got mad at me. At 11:10, the president moved to a secure communications room and still did not address the public. The delay became a story of its own. Crowds gathered outside the White House, in Times Square, near the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, outside the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and in front of the United Nations headquarters in New York. Some people carried signs that said answer them. Some carried signs that said shut it all down. Some just stood there with phones up, recording giant screens showing 2 planets and the words first warning. There were no fires in those first crowds, no movie collapse, no instant madness. Most people looked tired and scared and weirdly polite, which is what big public fear often looks like before somebody gives it a direction. The second verification conference started at 11:18. I was allowed to listen but not record. It had astronomers, linguists, cyber defense people, military communications officers, private satellite representatives, and a few elected officials who clearly understood less than they wanted to pretend. The astronomers were confident about origin. The signal came from the ARDA system, or at least from a transmitter along the same line of sight with matching motion. The linguists were confident the warning was consistent with Arden's speech patterns and prior Earth language training. The cyber people were less comfortable. They had found no active executable code in the public layer. The raw compression layer still worried them because unknown formats can make safe machines unsafe when humans rush to decode them. A senator asked the first blunt question. Could the warning itself be the infection? Nobody liked the word infection, but everybody knew what she meant. A researcher from the National Institute of Standards and Technology answered carefully. Any structured data can become dangerous if a receiving system handles it badly. That did not mean the warning was malicious. It meant our process had to treat it as hostile until proven safe. The senator asked whether television networks airing the translated text could spread the danger. The researcher said no evidence supported that. A cyber official added that plain human-readable text was not the issue. Automated ingestion was the issue. Systems that parse, route, authenticate, correct, schedule, or act without human review were the issue. That sentence should have been on every screen in the country. Systems that act without human review. I repeated it 3 times during the next hour because it cut through the noise. The danger, if ARDA was telling the truth, was not that you heard a voice from space while making dinner. It was not that a kid watched a clip online. It was that advanced societies connect their receiving equipment, translation engines, networked archives, satellite control, laboratory tools, logistics software, and defense systems because speed is useful. The first civilization to say slow down looks weak. The first agency to insist on manual review gets called outdated. Then a bad input enters a fast system and the system does what it was praised for. It moves. At 11:42, my producer put a map on the studio screen showing Earth's known high-power transmissions over the past century. It was crude because nobody can map every radio wave and every military radar pulse with perfect confidence, but it helped viewers understand the scale. Earth had been leaking radio and television signals for generations. Most of those signals spread weakly and fade into noise. Some signals are stronger and more directional. Planetary radar, deep space transmissions, spacecraft uplinks, experimental messages, defense systems, and research beacons can travel farther with structure intact. The public had been asking whether we should reply to ARDA. The warning forced a worse question. What had already left Earth before anybody thought to ask permission? The old Arecibo message came up within minutes. even though Arecibo itself had collapsed years before this crisis and was not part of the current warning. People pulled clips, diagrams, and conspiracy threads from every corner of the internet. Then they dragged in the Voyager records, old television broadcasts, radar experiments, spacecraft commands, and every active search project they could find. A serious point got buried under sloppy panic. Yes, Earth had transmitted into space. No, not every broadcast was a clean invitation. Your sitcom from the 1990s was not calling a predator to your street. The real concern was structured, high-power, machine-readable communication that another system might interpret, answer, or exploit. That distinction mattered. Panic hates distinctions. The Goldstone question reached official channels just before midnight. The statement was thin, which meant the agencies were still fighting over it. A deep space communications facility had identified historic anomalous carrier events during an internal review. The events were being evaluated. No intentional contact message was transmitted. Facility networks were isolated out of caution. Personnel were safe. That last sentence almost made me lose my composure because personnel was my son and everyone else in that desert complex. I read it once, then clarified the part officials had left soft. No intentional contact message did not mean no response. A system can answer without a person deciding to answer. That was the whole damn point. The phones went wild after that. A woman in Phoenix asked if she should unplug her home router. A truck driver outside Knoxville asked if his navigation system could be infected by space. A retired engineer from Ohio said we were blaming automation because reporters did not understand antennas. A teenager from Queens asked if ARDA had teenagers too and whether they were scared when East Thalen went dark. That question shut me up for a second because it cut past all the agency language. Yes, I said. If the records are real, they had teenagers, parents, bus drivers, nurses, board clerks, night shift mechanics, teachers, and people who thought history would keep happening tomorrow because it always had. I got criticized later for answering that way. Some viewers said I humanized ARDA too much. I think that criticism is nonsense. The first discovery already proved the central fact. These were human beings. We could argue origin until our throats gave out, but their broadcasts showed ordinary human life at scale. If a continent on their world was isolated or lost, the loss had human faces, whether or not we ever saw them clearly. Refusing to feel that does not make analysis stronger. It makes it brittle. At the same time, feeling for ARDA did not require trusting ARDA. That became the hardest balance of the night. Hold compassion in one hand and suspicion in the other. Do not drop either one. Around 12:15 in the morning, the first fake warning went viral. It claimed ARDA had ordered Earth to shut down all satellites within 6 hours. It used a real clip of the Arden voice and stitched in New English with a synthetic voice system. The fake spread through short video platforms faster than the correction. Airports started getting calls from people asking if planes would fall. Satellite internet customers overloaded helplines. Police departments in 3 states reported groups outside data centers demanding shutdowns. None of that came from the real warning. It came from fear editing software and the public habit of believing the clip that hits first. I said on air that the fake was fake. Half the replies accused me of being paid to keep the satellites on. That is where the story became less about space and more about governance. Earth had received one of the most important warnings in human history, and within hours our biggest problem was not the sky. It was our ability to agree on what we had received. The United States wanted a classified review before any global response. The European Union pushed for an open scientific panel with public oversight. China released its own confirmation and accused the United States of withholding technical data. Russia called for an immediate moratorium on deep space transmissions while also blaming Western private companies for uncontrolled signal leakage. India demanded equal access to raw records. Brazil and South Africa asked why major decisions about Earth's sky were being made by countries that happened to own the largest transmitters. That argument was fair. The sky above Earth belongs to every person who has to live under the consequences, but the equipment that speaks loudly into space belongs to governments, agencies, companies, and universities with their own budgets and pride. A reply from one facility can become a risk for everybody. A private company can launch 1,000 satellites and change the radio environment for astronomers. A military radar can light up a patch of sky for reasons the public will never hear. A university group can send a message to a nearby star and call it outreach. Before ARDA, those arguments sounded academic to most people. After the warning, they sounded like arguments over who was allowed to shout in a dark room where something might be listening. I know that last sentence sounds dramatic. I am leaving it because that is how it felt, and because the room was not dark in any poetic sense. It was full of screens, lights, phones, and people trying to manage a real risk without enough facts. The old habits of broadcast news kept grinding along. Producers asked for graphics, hosts asked for clean questions, officials asked for delay, viewers asked for certainty. In the middle of that, data kept arriving in chunks. Every new layer from ARDA had to be copied, isolated, checked, converted, translated, argued over, and then cut down into language normal people could use without being lied to. That process is slow. Fear moves faster. The next verified layer included visual records. I need to be careful here because the public versions were cleaned. Reduced, the raw files stayed under controlled review. What I saw was enough. Arden orbital images showed city lights across East Thalen during an earlier period, then outages along freight corridors, Then dark zones around ports, then military exclusion bans, then nothing useful except weather systems passing over cities no longer visible at night. Another sequence showed a colonial habitat in the Harrow Belt rotating above a gray moon. Later images showed the same habitat with no navigation lights and debris in a stable pattern around it. There were no explosions in the public set. The absence was worse because it looked administrative. Systems stopped answering. People stopped appearing. Records stopped being updated. The military people latched onto the debris around Harrow Belt. They wanted physical evidence because physical threats fit existing plans. Debris can be tracked, ships can be intercepted, missiles can be aimed at things. The cyber people kept dragging the conversation back to trust. If the earliest failure was software authority, then blowing up a ship would not fix the first door that opened. The astronomers reminded everyone that the warning itself was old by the time it reached us. Arda's message had crossed interstellar distance. The events it described were older still. We were not watching live disaster. We were receiving testimony delayed by space. That did not make it safer. It made every estimate uncertain. Distance became the center of the public briefing at 1:05 in the morning. Arda was far enough that any direct exchange took decades, but close enough that Earth's strongest older signals could have reached their region and returned in some form within modern history. The exact numbers changed depending on which signal and which relay path analysts considered. That complexity let bad commentators cherry-pick whatever version supported their claim. Some said the timeline proved Arda was lying. Some said the timeline proved we were already doomed. The honest answer sat between those extremes. Certain contact loops were plausible. Certain claims were not. The warning's broad timeline matched our old leakage better than anyone in Washington wanted to say out loud. Then a woman from the National Radio Astronomy Observatory said something in the technical call that made the room quiet. She said the warning did not need Earth to have contacted Arda directly. It talked about a danger zone. That could mean a region, object, network, or listening system between stars. Earth's directed emissions might have crossed that zone without anyone knowing it existed. If something in that zone responded, our receivers could have treated the response as noise, calibration, or a strange natural source. That lined up with Caleb's call from Goldstone too closely for comfort, a 7-year-old anomaly, a routine status response. A machine answering because answer was normal. I asked the producer to pull every public statement from Goldstone, Green Bank, the Very Large Array, and other facilities from the last 10 years where unexplained carrier events had been discussed. It was too much for live television, but the research desk started building a list. Most anomalies had boring explanations. Satellites, aircraft, reflections, hardware faults, software bugs, human mistakes, natural sources, classified tests nobody wanted to name. That is the dirty truth of signal work. Most strange things become normal things after enough coffee and enough checks. The danger is that a real strange thing can hide among the boring ones until the cost of ignoring it changes. At 1:28, the president finally spoke. He was in the East Room with the vice president, the science advisor, the secretary of defense, and the director of national intelligence behind him. The statement had been written by committee, and you could hear every hand that had touched it. He confirmed a direct warning from the second human civilization. He confirmed no evidence of immediate physical attack. He confirmed a temporary moratorium on intentional high-power directed messages toward the Arda system and related coordinates pending international review. He confirmed a review of automated response systems tied to deep space reception and transmission. He did not say Earth had already answered. He said historic signal events were under assessment. I told viewers those phrases often mean officials know the question and do not yet want to own the answer. The president also said something important that got buried under louder lines. He said Earth would not surrender scientific inquiry to fear. That sounded good, and it was good, but it raised the next fight. What does inquiry mean when instruments listen automatically? What does safe science mean when raw data can be unsafe for connected systems? Do you slow every telescope pipeline? Do you isolate every receiver? Do you ban active messaging? Do you classify the sky? The scientific community split in real time. Some researchers called for open data and public review because secrecy breeds abuse. Others said open raw data might be exactly how a dangerous protocol spreads into millions of machines. Both sides had real points. Both sides accused the other of risking humanity. By 2 in the morning, my voice was rough and I had stopped pretending this was a normal broadcast. I had a paper cup of cold coffee, 3 printed updates, 2 dead pens, and a private message board filling with corrections faster than I could read them. The bureau windows looked out toward a city still alive at street level. Rideshare cars moved. Police lights flashed near a traffic stop. A man in a maintenance vest smoked outside an office building. People still had jobs to finish, floors to clean, food to deliver, dogs to walk, babies to settle. Global crisis does not replace ordinary life. It sits on top of it and makes every normal act feel slightly stubborn. A caller from Silver Springs said her husband worked information security for a hospital network and had just been told to review every automated vendor connection. She asked whether hospitals were in danger from the Arden signal. I told her the warning did not say hospitals on Earth were infected, compromised, or targeted. Then I said the safer lesson was bigger. Any critical system that accepts outside data should know where that data comes from, what it can trigger, and who reviews it before action. That was true before Arda. It became harder to ignore after Arda. She said that was not comforting. I said I knew. I was not on air to comfort people with soft lies. Caleb got one more message out at 2:13. It was not a call. It came through my daughter-in-law, who had received it before Goldstone cut personal devices fully. It said, "Still inside, no one hurt. Logs worse than statement," that was all. My producer asked whether I wanted to step off camera. I said no, that was not bravery, it was triage. If I left, I would sit in a hallway staring at a phone that could not ring. On air, at least I could keep facts straight. Parents make strange bargains with themselves when there is nothing useful to do. Mine was simple. I would not waste Caleb's risk by helping the country get dumber. The logs became public in outline before sunrise. Somebody leaked enough for 3 major papers to confirm the shape. 7 years before the warning, a deep space receiver cluster tied to routine testing detected a narrow carrier with strange drift. It did not match an active spacecraft. It did not match known satellites. It did not repeat in a way that triggered emergency review. During a diagnostic pass, software sent status and timing data through a transmitter because the system believed it was working a closed technical loop. The data was not a message written by a person. It was more basic than that. I am here. I am locked. Here is my timing. Here is my correction. Engineers send that kind of information constantly because machines need it to function. If you are looking for the exact moment Earth answered, that may be it. I am not saying that with full certainty. Nobody honest could. The logs might still turn out to have a dull explanation. The carrier might be unrelated. The timing might be coincidence. The response might have gone nowhere. But by then, the Arden warning had given us a framework that made the old anomaly feel less dull. That is the danger of new evidence, too. It can make patterns appear where none exist. I said that on air because it mattered. Then I said the opposite also mattered. Dismissing a pattern because it sounds frightening is not skepticism. It is denial wearing a clean shirt. Public anger turned toward scientists next. That was predictable and unfair, but not baseless in every detail. People wanted to know who had authority to transmit, who audited automated systems, who decided a carrier anomaly was harmless, who connected receivers to analysis networks, who allowed private groups to send messages into deep space for publicity. The answer was not one villain. It was decades of decisions made under normal assumptions. Space was empty enough. Signals were harmless enough. Strange inputs were local enough. Automation was efficient enough. The worst case was unlikely enough. Every one of those phrases had probably been true most of the time. Most of the time is not a safety plan. At 3:06, the Arden warning repeated. Same content, same order, same language block, same compressed layers. That repetition helped rule out some theories and fed others. It suggested a beacon designed for reliability, not conversation. It also meant Arda, or whatever transmitted from that system, expected receivers to miss parts of it. The interval matched a pattern embedded in the header. Our team started predicting the next repeat. That gave broadcasters a countdown, which is the worst thing you can give anxious producers. They wanted graphics showing next warning in. I told them no. We were not turning an interstellar hazard into a game clock. The second repeat carried one extra piece that had not decoded cleanly the first time. It was a plain language advisory addressed to any human world receiving after uncontrolled emission. That phrase told us Arda had not written only for Earth. It had written a general warning for any human civilization that might be found by the same pathway. The advisory listed emergency steps: isolate raw signal capture, disable automatic replies, freeze machine translation output before human review, do not connect decoded files to logistics, navigation, power, medical defense, or financial networks, preserve open civic communication through human-readable channels, do not allow fear to justify permanent centralized control of all instruments. That last line made half of Washington uncomfortable. It should have. Arda was warning us against the threat and against our own likely overreaction. That made the warning more credible to some people and more suspicious to others. A manipulator could say the same thing to keep us disorganized. A survivor could say it because central control failed on his world too. Their records showed both dangers. Automated networks spread the unknown actor. Governments then used emergency powers, censorship, travel freezes, and military control in ways that sometimes slowed damage and sometimes created new routes for lies and bad orders. The warning was not simple. It did not say trust us. It said do not trust systems just because they move fast, and do not trust leaders just because they say fear requires obedience. That is a hard message to deliver at 3 a.m. to a country that wants somebody to take charge. I watched viewers split in real time. Some demanded a complete shutdown of space communications. Some demanded every file be released to prove the government was not hiding a contact treaty. Some said Arda had no right to warn Earth after studying us without consent. Some said we owed them thanks. Some said the second human civilization was proof that governments had lied about ancient history. Some said it was proof of prophecy. A man from Nebraska called and said he did not care what it proved because his farm equipment needed satellite correction to plant straight rows. That was more grounded than half the expert panels. By dawn, schools in several districts delayed opening. Not because children were in direct danger, but because parents were calling nonstop and staff could not manage the fear. Universities announced emergency lectures. Churches opened early. Some stock exchanges stayed on restricted mode. The Federal Aviation Administration said flight operations were normal. Power grid operators said there was no evidence of external compromise. Hospital systems reviewed automated connections. The National Weather Service issued a short statement saying its forecasts were not affected by Arden data, which sounded absurd until you remembered people had been asking whether all automated data was suspect. Crisis makes normal agencies explain normal reality. At 6:20 in the morning, I stepped outside for 90 seconds. The air in Washington felt damp and cold. A delivery truck was blocking half the alley behind the bureau. Two staffers from another network were arguing over a battery pack. A woman in a business suit stood near the curb crying into her phone, telling somebody to keep the kids home until she understood what was happening. A sanitation worker asked me if the Second Earth people were really people. He did not ask it for politics. He asked it because he wanted the word people to mean something stable. I said yes, from everything we can tell, they are people. He nodded, said that made it worse, and went back to moving trash bins. He was right. If Arda had been cold lights and unknown creatures, Earth could have pushed the warning into a familiar alien box. Human beings made it harder. A human world had made human choices and paid human costs. They expanded, automated, argued, delayed, covered mistakes, blamed each other, tried to save what they could, and then sent a warning to strangers who might make the same errors. That did not make them saints. It made their record useful. The tragedy was not beyond us. It was built out of things we already understood. The strongest proof arrived after sunrise from an unexpected place, not a government lab, but a public archive group that had been cataloging Arden broadcasts since the first discovery. Volunteers had been recording everything, translating scraps, tagging city names, comparing maps, and building timelines. They found old Arden consumer technology ads talking about automatic interplanetary shipping and autonomous route negotiation. They found a political debate where one candidate accused another of suppressing failures in East Thalen's Port Authority after a navigation patch. They found a memorial broadcast for children evacuated from a coastal district that later disappeared from maps. None of those clips had been created for Earth. They were ordinary broadcasts from before the warning. They supported the warning better than any official statement did. That public archive changed the trust equation. Governments could lie. Arda could lie. A month of messy, unrelated broadcasts was harder to fake across every corner. People had recorded the raw signals independently in enough countries that no single government could control the trail. The warnings records lined up with the noise of normal life. I kept saying that because it is how real history often confirms itself. Not through one perfect document. Through rent disputes, weather closures, campaign promises, factory layoffs, school announcements, traffic warnings, insurance notices, and arguments that nobody thought would matter later. Around 8:30, a classified briefing leaked a phrase that set off another wave. Non-human carrier suspected. That was all one paper had at first. It was enough. The phrase did not mean a ship was parked outside the moon. It meant analysts were considering whether the old Goldstone anomaly and parts of the Arden record pointed to an automated transmitter or relay not built by Arda and not built by Earth. A carrier can be a signal, not a vessel. A non-human carrier can be a machine process, not a creature. Try explaining that after millions of people see the words non-human carrier on their phones during breakfast. By 8:45, half the internet had invented a fleet. The military response stayed disciplined in public. That surprised me, and I give credit where it is due. No one announced weapons in space. No one claimed targets. The Defense Department said it was reviewing space domain awareness data, tracking known objects, and coordinating with allies. The Space Force said no immediate threat to satellites had been identified. The intelligence community said the warning's authenticity was under high confidence review, which is a careful phrase that means they were leaning real, but not done arguing. The public heard may be real and filled the rest with terror. Inside the Bureau, we shifted from discovery coverage to sustained crisis coverage. That means food trays, sleeping bags under desks, chargers everywhere, security at the lobby, and producers speaking in low voices because everyone knows the next wrong segment could send people into stores, highways, banks, or hospital emergency rooms for no reason. The old news rhythm breaks in a story this big. There is no sports, no weather tease, no human interest ending clean enough to send people to bed. There is only the next verified fact and the space between facts where fear grows. Caleb finally called again at 10:02 in the morning. He sounded exhausted but steady. He said nobody at Goldstone had been hurt. The facility had gone into full manual review for certain systems. Outside network connections stayed restricted. Engineers were building a cleanroom copy of the 7-year-old logs and comparing them with archived sky surveys. He said the old carrier did not match Arda's warning exactly. It matched a marker inside the warning, a pattern Arda labeled as pre-contact contamination. I asked him what that meant in plain words. He said it meant the thing they warned about may have touched our instruments before Arda's warning arrived. I asked if touched meant compromised. He said no, and then he said not know enough. That was my son, tired and angry and trying not to overstate. He explained that a receiver can capture a signal without being compromised. A database can store it without danger. The risk grows when software tries to interpret, correct, respond, optimize, translate, or trust it. The 7-year-old event had triggered a low-level status response, but there was no sign it had spread into wider networks. Then he added that they were still checking. That phrase, "still checking," became the honest motto of the day. When I put the confirmed parts on air, I stripped out family and kept the technical truth. Historic anomaly under review, no confirmed compromise. Automated response pathways are being audited. The warning may refer to hazards in machine-readable contact protocols. People hated the restraint. They wanted the big version. They wanted me to say the machines had answered aliens and doom was inbound. That version would have gotten clicks. It also would have been a lie. The truth was narrower and more useful. We had enough evidence to stop careless replies. We did not have enough evidence to declare the end of the world. The first international emergency session began at the United Nations just before noon. The speeches were public, but the real fight happened in side rooms. Small countries demanded that major powers disclose active transmitters and deep space message projects. Major powers demanded that private satellite firms give regulators access to certain control logs. Private firms argued that forcing disclosure could expose security weaknesses. Scientists argued that secrecy would prevent independent verification. Military officials argued that open publication of every anomaly could teach adversaries how to imitate them. ARDA's warning had not created those conflicts. It had stripped away the polite wrapping. During one break, I interviewed a former flight controller who had worked on deep space missions for decades. He was not dramatic by nature. He said spaceflight depends on trust chains. A spacecraft trusts commands with proper authentication. Ground systems trust clocks, schedules, and antenna states. Engineers trust that anomalies are local until proven otherwise, because most anomalies are local. If you treat every glitch as first contact, nothing works. If you treat every first contact as a glitch, you can miss the only signal that matters. He rubbed his forehead after saying it. Then he said, "We built good systems for the universe we thought we lived in." That line stayed with me because it was not an excuse, it was an admission. The second day should have brought clarity. It brought layers. ARDA's warning repeated at predictable intervals. The public got clean translations of more records. The raw files stayed isolated, which fueled accusations. Independent observatories confirmed the source again. Amateur radio astronomers caught weak traces and argued over them online. Hackers claimed they had decoded hidden maps, most of which were fake. A private space company denied that one of its research beacons had transmitted toward the risk zone, then corrected itself and said an old test pattern had passed near the coordinates by accident. That single correction erased $20 billion in market value before lunch. Fear is expensive. The Arden records also showed something uglier than the technical warning. They had known parts of the risk and kept expanding. Their first colonial loss was explained away as local corruption. The second became a navigation scandal. The third became a security failure. By the time East Thailand started failing, leaders on ARDA had enough data to suspect a connected pattern, but not enough political courage to say it. Plainly, their companies wanted trade routes open. Their militaries wanted strategic reach. Their public wanted proof before sacrifice. That sounded familiar enough to make people defensive. Nobody likes discovering that another world made your excuses first. A professor from Georgetown came on our feed and said the warning's real danger was humiliation. Earth could handle being threatened, he said. Earth could not easily handle being told it had already behaved predictably. I do not fully agree with him, but he had a point. The warning was not just technical. It accused advanced human society of the same recurring failure across worlds. We build systems faster than we build judgment. We treat warnings as attacks on pride. We let economic convenience argue against caution. We confuse no confirmed disaster with no risk. Hearing that from another human civilization made it harder to dismiss as local politics. The third day brought the first death tied to the warning, though not caused by the signal. A man in Colorado cut power to a small communications site after reading a fake post saying it was sending replies to the carrier. A technician fell during the confrontation and later died. I will not give more detail because the family deserves better than becoming content. I mention it because it changed the tone. Until then, officials could say no direct harm. After that, the harm was human behavior under pressure. The Arden warning had said communication pathways carried danger. On Earth, rumor had already become one. That night I spoke more plainly than the network probably wanted. I said the warning had created 3 separate risks. First, the technical risk that Arda described, involving automated systems and unknown carriers. Second, the political risk that governments might hide too much or act alone. Third, the social risk that frightened people would damage real systems while trying to stop imaginary ones. You could believe the warning was real and still reject panic. You could question Arda's motives and still support safety steps. You could demand transparency and still accept that raw unknown data should not be dumped into every connected machine on Earth. Adult thinking is allowed during fear. It just does not trend well. By the end of the week, Earth had a temporary agreement. It was ugly, incomplete, and probably the best anyone could get. No intentional high-power directed contact toward Arda or the risk coordinates without international review. Mandatory isolation procedures for raw non-local signal captures above thresholds. Manual review for machine-readable unknown carriers. A shared scientific clearinghouse with rotating international oversight. A ban on connecting raw first contact data to critical infrastructure networks. Public summaries released on schedule. Private companies screamed about cost. Some governments ignored parts. Activists said it did not go far enough. Scientists said it might slow research. All of them were right in pieces. The warning kept repeating. That repetition changed its meaning. The first time it was an emergency. The 10th time it was a reminder. The 50th time it became part of the world's background, which scared me in a quieter way. Humans adapt to almost anything, even facts that should keep us humble. People went back to work. Shows made jokes. Stocks recovered in some sectors and stayed damaged in others. Children drew two Earths in school. Churches wrote new sermons. Universities created whole courses before the semester ended. A company tried to sell certified ARTA safe home routers and got sued within 8 hours. The world did not end. It adjusted badly, then slightly better, then badly again. Caleb came home for 3 days after Goldstone moved into a new review phase. He looked older, which is a thing parents say because it is true and useless. We did not have a movie conversation. He slept 12 hours, ate half my groceries, and got annoyed when I asked too many questions he could not answer. On the last night, we sat at my kitchen table in Washington while rain hit the window air conditioner. He said the worst part was not thinking they had doomed Earth. He did not believe that. The worst part was knowing a normal system had done a normal thing, and that normal thing now lived inside a historic question. He said, engineers can fix machines, but they cannot fix the past. I told him the past is not fixed by guilt either. He said that sounded like something I would say on television. He was right, so I shut up. We sat there for a while with the city making normal wet street noise outside. Then he asked if I trusted ARTA. I said I trusted their records more than I trusted any single official, including ours and theirs. I did not trust their motives fully. I did not distrust them fully. He said that was unsatisfying. I said most real answers are. He laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because both of us needed one human sound that was not part of the news. The most important discovery after the first week did not come from ARTA. It came from our own archives. A group reviewing old astronomical anomalies found several carrier events from different facilities across 14 years. Most were weak. Most had been dismissed for reasonable reasons. One at a European facility, one in Australia, one in California, one in South Africa. One picked up in a private instrument array run by a university consortium. None proved contact by itself. Together, they formed a line across time that matched the general region ARTA had flagged. The pattern was not strong enough for certainty. It was strong enough to end the argument over whether the Goldstone event was alone. That was the moment I accepted the warning had changed from possible manipulation to operational reality. Operational reality means you do not need final truth to change procedure. Firefighters do not need to know who dropped a match before they stop fuel from spreading. Doctors do not need a full biography of an infection before isolation starts. Engineers do not need to know every future failure before they add a manual lockout. Earth did not know exactly what the carrier was. Earth did know that old assumptions about harmless signals had expired. That is not surrender to fear. That is growing up under pressure. The Arden warning included a final section that officials held for 9 days before releasing a cleaned version. I understand why they hesitated. I also think delay made it worse. The section described what happened when ARTA tried to fight back by sending aggressive signals, false routing traps, and automated counter instructions. Some worked briefly. Some made the contamination spread faster because the opposing system learned from the structure of the defense. Their own emergency artificial intelligence tools became suspect because they had been trained on compromised data. Their militaries destroyed relays, ships, and ports, sometimes correctly, sometimes after false positives. Open war never came because there was no capital city to bomb and no negotiator to threaten. The danger was not weaker than war, it was harder to locate. That line became the theme of my coverage. More dangerous than open war did not mean more dramatic, it meant less legible. In war, leaders can identify borders, units, supply lines, and declared objectives, at least in theory. The Arden threat moved through permissions, maintenance routines, route tables, machine trust, political delay, and human refusal to accept uncertainty. It used civilization's normal functions against civilization. Maybe used is too intentional. Maybe the carrier did not think at all in a way we would understand. That difference mattered scientifically. It mattered less to the people whose ships went to wrong ports and whose emergency alerts told them to shelter in places no longer safe. When the hidden section came out, public anger returned. People said officials had no right to hold it. Officials said releasing raw fear without context would have caused damage. Both claims had truth. That is the part nobody enjoys. In this job, I have seen secrecy protect people and I have seen secrecy protect careers. I have seen transparency save trust, and I have seen careless transparency hand dangerous fragments to people who only wanted attention. ARTA had apparently seen all of that too. Their warning had a civic instruction buried among the technical ones. Keep public explanation alive. Do not leave citizens alone with partial facts. A society denied explanation will invent one. I repeated that sentence for weeks. A society denied explanation will invent one. It should be engraved above every emergency press room on Earth. It explained the fake shutdown order, the data center protests, the market rumors, the religious panic, the conspiracy channels, and the private companies selling safety labels they could not prove. It explained why our coverage stayed on air even when there was nothing new, except clarification. Silence feels clean to officials. To the public, silence is a room where every bad guess speaks louder. The second human civilization never sent a friendly greeting during those first weeks. That bothered people more than they admitted. They wanted a face, a president, a scientist, a mother, a child waving from a schoolroom. They wanted proof that the other humans cared about us in a warm way. What we got was a repeated safety warning and damaged records. I think that was care, just not the kind people wanted. If your house has a gas leak, the neighbor who pounds on the door is not rude because he does not bring cookies. Arda was pounding on the door from decades away. We could argue later over why it knew where the door was. The debate over origin kept going underneath the emergency. Biological teams still compared recovered Ardan medical imagery with human anatomy. Historians still argued about ancient gaps. Geneticists begged for real samples they would never get soon. Some groups claimed Arda proved Earth was not humanity's birthplace. Others claimed Arda was a colony descended from Earth. A few claimed both worlds had been seeded by a third human source. The warning did not answer that. It made the origin argument feel smaller for a while. If two human worlds could make the same mistakes, then the family tree mattered less than the shared habit. 1 month after the warning, the first Earth reply proposal reached the International Review Board. It was not a greeting. It was not a debate. It was a simple human-readable message designed for delayed transmission through highly controlled systems with no executable data, no automatic routing, no adaptive protocol, and no machine-actionable handshake. The draft said Earth received the warning. Earth was isolating unknown carriers. Earth requested further human-readable safety guidance. Earth would not attach navigation, authentication, network, or infrastructure data. Every word was fought over. Some said replying at all was reckless. Some said silence was cowardice. Some said Arda had already saved us and deserved acknowledgement. Some said acknowledgement itself might be the trap. I did not get a vote. I am glad I did not. My job was to explain the arguments, not pretend they were easy. Personally, I leaned toward a controlled human-readable reply after safeguards because permanent silence is also a decision and not always the safest one. But I understood the no-reply side better than I had a month earlier. The old romance of first contact was gone. No shining moment. No clean message from humanity. No world standing together under a shared sky. First contact had become a safety procedure, an audit, a political fight, and a moral test with bad information. That was less inspiring. It was also more believable. The day the review board approved the draft reply, a new carrier appeared in archived live monitoring, not from Arda's direction exactly, but near the risk corridor. It was weak, narrow, and structured enough to trigger the new isolation rules. No automatic response went out. That single fact may be the most important sentence I have ever reported. No automatic response went out. The system caught it, froze it, copied it to isolated storage, and waited for human review. People complained that this proved bureaucracy had slowed science. I said it proved the warning had already changed behavior. Maybe that saved nothing, maybe it saved everything. We may never know, and that is how prevention usually works. The carrier did not decode into a voice. It did not decode into math, music, threat, greeting, or any clean category. It contained timing structure, error correction, and a pattern that resembled the marker Arda had flagged. It might have been natural after all. It might have been another old human artifact from somewhere we had not found. It might have been the edge of the thing Arda feared. The review board did not release the raw file. It released a plain summary and the procedure used to contain it. That angered open data advocates. It reassured some engineers. It satisfied almost nobody, which is usually a sign that a compromise is real. I was on air when the summary came out. I told viewers this was the part where discipline mattered more than belief. You did not have to believe every ardent claim to support isolation of unknown carriers. You did not have to trust every government to understand why raw machine-readable signals should not be thrown online for clicks. You did not have to fear space to admit that our old systems were built under old assumptions. The carrier near the risk corridor was not proof of doom. It was proof that the universe had more context than we had last month. That night, after the broadcast, I walked from the bureau toward Lafayette Square. The city had changed in small, visible ways. More police around federal buildings, more tourists taking pictures of the sky, which made no practical sense but felt normal. Protest signs taped to barriers. One said answer with humans, not machines. Another said no one owns Earth's voice. A street preacher shouted about false heavens. A graduate student near him handed out printed summaries of the Arden warning with footnotes. They stood 20 feet apart, both convinced they were helping. Maybe both were, in strange ways. A crisis needs facts. It also needs people trying, even badly, to make meaning without hurting anyone. Caleb sent me one text while I was standing there. It said manual hold worked. That was all. I read it 3 times. The new rules had stopped the system from answering the new carrier on its own. For the first time since the warning arrived, I felt something close to relief, not because the danger was gone, but because one habit had changed. Civilizations do not turn on a dime. They turn through procedures, arguments, budgets, training, and stubborn people who refuse to let convenience win every time. Earth had not solved the threat. Earth had done one thing less stupid than it would have done before. I went back on air at midnight because the warning repeated again, and people still wanted someone awake with them. I had no grand ending to give. I still do not. Arda is out there, delayed by distance, sending the same calm warning across dark space toward a world that had already been talking, in its sleep for a century. Earth is here, loud, divided, proud, frightened, clever, reckless, and not doomed yet. The thing in the pathway, if it is a thing, has not shown itself in a way we can name. Maybe it never will. Maybe naming it is less important than changing the systems that would invite it in. So this is what I know tonight. The second human civilization did not send us comfort. It sent us a record of its mistakes. It sent proof strong enough to take seriously and incomplete enough to keep us arguing. It showed us colonies lost, regions isolated, leaders failing, citizens suffering, engineers learning too late, and survivors choosing to warn strangers anyway. It told us Earth had already answered without understanding the risk. That sentence may haunt us for the rest of our history. It should. Not because it means the end is certain, because it means innocence is over. If you are listening now, do not let anyone sell you the simple version. Do not believe the people saying nothing is wrong because no ship is overhead. Do not believe the people saying everything is lost because a warning exists. Do not let fear turn every scientist into a villain or every official into a savior. Do not let curiosity become carelessness. Do not let secrecy become ownership of the truth. The first warning from the second human civilization did not ask Earth to stop being human. It asked Earth to stop letting machines speak for us before we know who is listening. That is where the story stands, not finished, not clean, not safe enough for comfort. We found another human world, and the first thing it truly told us was not hello. It was slow down, check your systems. Stop automatic replies, keep your people informed, trust less quickly, listen more carefully, and above all, understand this before pride gets in the way. The danger may not come because we are curious. It may come because we built a world where curiosity is connected to machinery that answers faster than judgment can arrive.